What steps have you taken to ensure your healthcare wishes are respected, especially in times when you might not be able to express them? This question is often pushed to the back of our minds, and it's crucial for our peace of mind and for those that we love. Today, I'm honored to have with me Rachel Schromen. She is an accomplished estate planning and elder law attorney and the owner of Schromen Law. Recognized as one of the top 3 best-rated estate law firms in St. Paul, Rachel's professional accolades are as impressive as her commitment to the community. Evident in her volunteer work as an end-of-life doula, she brings a wealth of experience and a unique perspective to today's discussion. In our conversation, we'll explore everything from the basics of healthcare directives to personal stories and professional advice. We'll uncover what a healthcare directive really means and why it's vital. We hear Rachel's personal story with her father, explore the balance between legalities and emotions, and dive into the practical steps of creating a healthcare directive. Her experiences, both personal and professional, shed light on the nuances and critical aspects of healthcare directives. Whether you're looking to prepare for the future or navigating these decisions with a loved one, this discussion promises to be enlightening, practical, and most importantly, deeply human. Here is my interview with Rachel Schromen. Rachel, hi. The day's
Hello.
here. So glad you're here. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, I want to hear a little bit more about your story, your background. You have a wealth of knowledge, and I'm just thrilled that our listeners get to learn from you.
Thank you so much. Well, as you know, I'm an estate planning and elder law attorney. Did not go to law school knowing this is what I wanted to do, but of course, hindsight's 2020. Starting at age 14, I was volunteering in nursing homes in my hometown of Dubuque, Iowa. So I was always kind of called to serve in that chapter of life. It started at a young age where I'd go and just visit or lead activities and call bingo. When I was in college, I was a social work major for a little while, more attracted to the elder side of that type of work. Ended up switching to pre law, went to law school thinking I wanted to be a litigator. I have about the furthest personality from a litigator personality. So I ended up finding my way to elder law, and now I practice doing that. As you know, in addition, I'm also an end of life doula, and that kind of transpired when I was practicing estate planning and elder law and wanted to just kind of be more supportive in a more emotional way. And I wasn't sure how that made sense with a law practice. So I started volunteering with a therapy dog that I used to have in hospice. And then after my dad passed, I did end of life doula training and have continued volunteering, doing more direct death and dying work that way.
Wow, you have that personal lens, and I know that having the compassionate side, right? And I'm sure being with people in those
Mm,
circumstances, it really gives you a whole nother perspective. Absolutely.
it does.
Well, we're going to dive in a little bit to
Mhm.
health directives, why it's important that we're familiar, what we can learn about it, what's significant. I know that a lot of times we hear these terms, but not fully grasp the breadth of what that means and why it's important.
Mhm.
So, with your expertise, we're able to do that today. So, for people that might not be familiar, can you give us an explanation of what is a healthcare directive and why is it significant for us, not only, I think, probably in all times of our life, but as we get older and our family members?
Yeah. A healthcare directive is a legal document where a person can name who they want to make their healthcare decisions and end of life decisions if they are unable to make them themselves. Now, it might be important to note, depending on where your listeners are, these are called different things in different states. So that can cause some confusion. In Minnesota, we call this document a healthcare directive. In other states, there's power of attorney for healthcare proxy, living will, all sorts of different names. But the bottom line is you are stating who has the authority to make medical decisions for you, review your medical records, get information from your doctor. And it's important to note that once a person turns 18, nobody has this inherent authority. And that's something I had never thought about until I was in law school. And I'm a moderately anxious person. I tend to worry about everything. When I turned 18, when I was in college, I studied abroad. I was going to college out of state. When I realized in law school that for the prior 4 or 5 years, if something had happened to me, it would have really been an uphill battle for my mom to get any information, make decisions, or get my body back into the country. It really kind of freaked me out. And I wondered, well, how have I not even thought of this? But I think a lot of parents take for granted, once my kid's 18, I'll still be able to make decisions. And even I assumed my mom would. So this isn't just a document that's, oh, once you get that terminal diagnosis, do it. Or once you're on hospice, it's important to do. We have a lot of parents who are bringing kids in or encouraging their child to work with us around the time they turn 18 or go off to college.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I relate to that. I'm lean anxious as well. And so thinking about all those scenarios where just how important it is that we can ensure, right, our decisions are honored and what we want and all of that. There's so much to learn about, I'm sure, the emotional roller coaster too that those decisions maybe can bring. And how do having those directives in place provide a sense of empowerment to not only those that are creating them, but families that are having to maybe execute that during those challenging times?
There definitely is those two sides to the coin with this document. And I'll even just speak from my own experience as a person who's done a healthcare directive and who's has parents that have healthcare directives that I've used when they were passing. Having a healthcare directive in place gives me a massive sense of security, not just in I know that someone has the authority to look out for my best interest and get the information they need to make decisions for me, but I've named the people who I feel confident will be able to act if that time comes, who I feel confident will make decisions that are in line with what I would want, people who won't be overly burdened by that. My younger brother is very, very sensitive, very emotional. It'd be a lot for him to be named to act in that role. I feel confident that doctors aren't going to be looking to him at a time that maybe might be difficult for him to make decisions. I also have put extra information around the types of wishes I would want to be made, my fears, my hopes, etc. It gives me peace of mind knowing that my loved ones will be supported in making decisions at a time that they might be struggling, depending what the situation is with me. On the flip side of that, I mean, kind of in vain or right in line with what I said, that's what families can experience. My dad passed away at the age of 70, and he was a retired excavator, Harley rider, cowboy boot, tattoo on his bicep guy, right? So his healthcare directive didn't have a lot of details. In fact, the only thing, and a lot of Midwesterners might relate to us, but the only thing that was shared with us was basically, before I go in a nursing home, take me out back with a gun. And he didn't even own a gun, but that was like the statement made, right? So when he passed away, at least we had a healthcare directive that named his wife to be able to make those decisions and had backups. And it had some general standard information. And there was a sentence in his healthcare directive that said, if I am at end of life and not expected to live, I wish to receive pain management to the highest extent possible, even if it may hasten my death. And we did need to rely on that document, and we did use that document to advocate for him having more pain management than what was being provided. That was a really, really, really big deal.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't have a ton of specifics because that's not something that, was maybe in line with his personality to do. And what I will say is being with my dad was the first time that I was with someone at death, period, let alone, someone I was close with that I loved. And my brain completely went blank. And, my dad passed away with some noise machine that the hospital had playing wave sounds that barely sounded like waves on his pillow. And a couple of weeks after he passed, these thoughts started coming up of, why didn't we play motorcycle noises from YouTube? Why didn't we put on Bad to the Bone or ZZ Top? Like, why didn't I scratch his back? I remember him asking me to scratch his back when I was little. He loved that. Why didn't I do that one last time? And what I know now is when I'm processing or facing grief, my brain really, really goes blank. I feel helpless, hopeless, and I don't know what to do. And that can be a very common experience. My mom's healthcare directive is almost overly specific. And I love that. I joke with people that if you read my mom's healthcare directive, you'd think I need everything spelled out for me. It's so basic and so step by step. But I have experienced that I need that in those moments. So if I ever am fortunate enough to support my mom at end of life, I can look at a piece of paper and be reminded that she wants the Everly Brothers played. I can read and know that hands on her face is what she finds to be comforting touch. That's not information I would have. We're not a family that touches. I have no idea what she finds comfortable. And so, kind of on the flip side, having that extra information gives me a lot of peace of mind. And I'm hopeful it helps reduce some of the experience I had of should have, could have, would have in hindsight when I didn't have that at the time. I was supporting my dad at end of life.
I think most of us, would you say, in your experience working with people where that is a common reaction to grief and loss, is that we want to shut down. There's trauma, I think, involved too, and we're going through that for the first time. And so we will forget the details and we won't really maybe remember as clearly what we needed to do or how we needed to honor those requests. So having some guideline is so helpful. It's almost like we can
Yes.
look at it as a gift to the people that we love
Mm-hmm.
end of our life that can make some of those decisions so that we take that off their plate of trying to come up with what do we do in those moments.
100%. And in fact, when I did my own healthcare directive, I have no problem drafting the legal part. I don't exactly love thinking through my wishes and what I would want. It stresses me out. I have the same reaction a lot of people tend to have of overwhelm, fear, not wanting to think about it. I'll think about everyone else's all day, but when it comes to my own, I'm still human. I might be an attorney that does this. I might work as an end of life doula, but I have my own human reactions. And if I sit down and I'm in the headspace of, okay, if I'm in a hospital bed and I'm completely paralyzed and I'm dying, what would I want? I kind of check out. Stresses me out. If I shift that perspective and I think, okay, my close friend Yvonne, who's my healthcare agent, is standing over me. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know what I want. What information can I give her to help her with that decision? I feel empowered and the information flows. And when I have clients who are struggling with this exercise or getting stuck on this particular document, we work with things like that, with perspective shifts, with, sometimes there's more that needs to be gone into than just let's shift our perspective. But that does tend to be a really helpful exercise when some of these lines of thought prove to be challenging.
When you said you have no problem with the legal part, right? Okay, so there's the legal side of it, but then there's those personal, I don't know if requests, is that the right word? But within that, when you work with people, what are some things we could be thinking about that are maybe outside of the legal piece of that, but more, is there certain, I don't know, categories of personal requests that we just could get us started, like when you're talking through that with your clients that you could share? I don't know, that could be helpful.
Yeah, it can be different for everyone. When I was a new attorney, what I will say is in law school, I got a lot of training on the legal questions to ask. This additional information can sometimes be regarded in the legal field as, for lack of a better word, fluffy. And maybe it doesn't get focused on as much by attorneys. And because I have this other interest and desire to dive in more, I wanted to have these conversations. And I was also 25 years old when I finished law school, which is wild to think about now, 10 years later. But 25 years old, little to no life experience. I didn't know what sorts of things you would think about. And so what I did is I just started Googling and I looked up what types of things should I put in a healthcare directive. I looked at different forms that are out there. The 5 Wishes form is a really nice document that asks a lot of those really personal questions, more so than a lot of other ones I've seen. How I organized my wishes is, and I just have like a bullet point Word document attachment to mine, but there's kind of like healthcare considerations, end of life, and then after death. And so, healthcare considerations, you can put in information about things you want people to know. I've had clients say, I'm diabetic. I have another client right now who suffers with joint pain. And so she's putting together a list of the supplements that she wants to make certain she continues receiving, because the supplements really help her joint pain and she prefers that to medications. My wishes around pain management, even personally, are different if I'm expected to live or if I'm expected to pass. I don't want to come out of a car accident with a fentanyl addiction. I really don't. If it's expected I'm going to pass away, considerations are different. So I've delineated that. Wishes can be very tangible. They can also be more around comfort care. I kind of referenced my mom has information around what type of music she would want, what kind of touch is comforting to her. That's all comfort care. After death, usually the healthcare agent, if you choose to, you can grant them the power to decide what happens with your body, and you can share what you would want. What I do encourage people to try to do is keep things they're communicating relatively overarching. So I had a client once who said, I do want extra information in this, and then came back with, it was almost 6 pages of specific medical decisions to be made in varying scenarios. And one, as far as I'm concerned, you basically need to have a medical degree to be able to do that. I don't have all that information, and I've seen a lot more than most people have. And also, you could think of 121 hypotheticals, and the 122nd is what will happen. So on the example of the pain medication, my healthcare directive does not say, if I'm expected to live, this is the dosing I want. If I'm not, this is the dosing that's appropriate. It point blank says, I'm scared of developing a physical addiction to pain medication. That information can help to inform a decision that a doctor is guiding with my healthcare agent, rather than stating when a person should, quote unquote, pull the plug or not. Share what a life worth living means to you. Mm-hmm. I met with 2 clients in the same day once. And the first gentleman I met with said, a life worth living to me means I have full use of my body. I recognize everyone around me. I can engage in intellectual, meaningful conversations, and I can take care of myself 100% of the time. I had COVID 2 weeks ago, and I did not meet that.
Wow. Yeah.
Very, very high standard of living. The next gentleman that came in had just recently had a near-death experience, and he said, a life worth living to me means I can feel the sun shining on my face. If those 2 people were in the exact same medical situation and a fast decision needed to be made, there's a pretty good chance their healthcare agents are making opposite decisions just based on that informative information. And that can be what's really helpful. I mean, there's plenty of specifics sometimes people have, and it's usually based on experiences. My dad had to have his lungs suctioned at end of life. They did it a couple different ways. It was traumatic for me to watch. And so now all of a sudden I have these opinions about that. Okay, I put it in my healthcare directive, but those are rare and not always necessarily helpful. I think my big takeaway would be, I do not want to receive treatments where you can tell I'm visibly uncomfortable.
So many considerations. This helps. I think it provides some framework, and you mentioned, personality wise, right? Some of us are more detailed,
yes,
specific. Some of us are a little more not detailed, and based on our lived experiences, right? It really is that personal preference.
Yeah. And at our office, we will send out, we have like a Word document that has questions to kind of prompt responses. Our office coordinator has training and can work with people to draft these at a fee that is not a legal fee, because this is really, really important information to have. What I found in practice is for some clients, it doesn't make sense to pay an hourly rate of an attorney to work through this with them for 2 to 3 hours. But we want to provide tools and opportunities so that if people do want to go into this detail, it's still supported, it's still possible, and or it's still affordable if they do choose to work with someone. And there's a lot of law firms across the country starting to work this way if it's important. That's a question you can ask when you reach out to an attorney to draft the healthcare directive. If you want to really go into detail and have a lot of support, and the firm says, well, we don't really do that, we're just lawyers here. Okay, look for another firm.
Right. No, that's a great advice.
Yeah.
Would you say there's a bigger conversation happening in our world in terms of just the recognition of making these decisions and having things in place? I feel like we're aging, and so I'm noticing more of these conversations are happening more mainstream. What are you seeing from your perspective?
100%. And I think there's a number of factors. COVID put human mortality in the spotlight and made it everyday conversation. And we had to deal with it whether we liked it or not. And it was really, really uncomfortable. It was traumatic for the world to go through. And people don't want to have that experience. A huge thing for me and most humans is fear of the unknown. And when we don't talk about death, we don't talk about end of life, it's a big unknown. I was practicing law again at 25, doing this type of work, and I had a almost debilitating fear of death to the point that I was kind of a hypochondriac. I'd be going into the doctor all the time, not real comfortable to do estate planning and elder law as a human that is that personally uncomfortable with death. And so I did what I do, and I said, well, I need to tackle this. And for me, what ended up helping was learning more, leaning into the conversation, demystifying it so it wasn't this big scary thing that I didn't understand. There's also, I'm in my 30s, my generation and the generation I think above me, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years, are going through caretaking for and supporting parents at end of life who don't talk about these things. A generation where maybe there wasn't such a focus on emotional intelligence as there is with our generation, where you just kind of keep quiet and you ignore things and you don't want to make people uncomfortable. And it's hard. It's very hard when I have clients that want to be very involved, very intentional with their estate planning in general, or very involved and very intentional with their healthcare directives. More often than not, it's because they've gone through an experience where either that wasn't done and they said, under no circumstances am I putting my kids through this, or their parents planned really, really well and they're walking away saying, that was so amazing. I want to do this for my children or family or friends.
Oh, so true. So, what advice would you offer families, adult children? How do we start these conversations that can often feel uncomfortable, right? They're, like you said, I think we don't always want to have the hard conversation because then we're acknowledging that this is potentially in our future, and that could feel a little
Mhm.
scary.
I mean, that can be so different for everyone. For some families, it's just about bringing it up. And once it's brought up, the conversation can flow well, making sure you reach out to support that's helpful to you. And everyone knows or can learn what that means for them. I'll speak to my own experience. For me, I mean, gosh, when my mom did her estate planning, she asked that I come back to Iowa and meet with her attorney with her. I said, yep, no problem. And I was maybe 27, 28 when this happened. And I drove back and then I sobbed through the entire meeting. And we stopped by the funeral home to get prepaid funeral planning documents. And we went home and we sat down to look them over. And I think I sat there for 30 seconds and I got up and left. I
Wow.
couldn't be in the room. I couldn't emotionally handle that conversation. And for me, it was, again, I was working on my death anxiety, but continuing to work on that, getting support from a therapist. Conversations over phone were easier for me to have with my mom around this. We communicate more vulnerably over the phone than we do in person. So we kind of defer to that. When she did her extra healthcare directive wishes, I typed them up for her. It was done over the phone. I'm not sure I would have been able to do it in person. And just knowing that. What I see with clients in my office, sometimes the conversation, it'll start really, really tangibly of we need to get this done. And when we're having, sometimes children will come in with their parents ask them to be there, and we're going through it, and the parents don't really see the big deal, and they're a little frustrated with having to go through paperwork. I get it. Having to meet with a lawyer, do paperwork can be frustrating. I don't disagree. But sometimes I can gently guide the conversation to say that this is more. This isn't just about you need to get your affairs in order so we get in our inheritance and don't have to deal with your mess. This is your children really want to support you. Your children want to do what your wishes are. Your children want to be able to grieve when you pass away and not spend their time in probate court,
Right.
get sworn in a month after you die and have to sit on a stand in front of a judge in a formal probate. I've represented clients in that situation. I hope I never have to go through that while I'm grieving. It can be very, very stressful. So just kind of starting, making sure you have the support. And sometimes, I've had plenty of clients that call and say, I don't know how to bring it up. And we just kind of strategize. In my own situation, for my mother, I think it was 4 years for my birthday and Christmas, I asked that she do her estate planning. And I was like, please do it for me, do it for me, do it for me. And it didn't get done. And then I brought up how much it would cost if she didn't.
There you go.
That was a motivating factor for her.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
We all have different motivating factors, right? And it finally kind of clicked with me. Well, maybe this is the angle. That I share that just to say it can be different for everyone.
Oh my goodness, so different. Yes. And there's different family dynamics too, right? So, what are some strategies that you have found if you're dealing with maybe disagreements or sensitive issues within families regarding these healthcare decisions?
Well, proactive planning is key. Having these conversations when emotions aren't high and when the crisis isn't happening can be massive. Having things in writing that families can lean on or turn to when emotions are high or crisis is happening is really important. That's not to say it's going to completely prevent anything from happening, but it can be helpful. This is a little off topic, but to give kind of an example, I think it was maybe when my mom was in her early 60s, I started saying, hey, when you come visit me in Minnesota, we should go look at nursing homes together. What the heck? And I said, well, I'd rather do it now while it's not real and we can just kind of have fun than 6 months before we know a move's going to happen, because those are very different experiences.
Absolutely.
Kind of similar with this.
Yeah, great idea.
If families are, maybe that planning isn't in place and there is some tension happening, lean on people around. If there is an attorney, maybe the attorney can kind of help guide that. If there's an end of life doula, they can be worth their weight in gold. Social workers, hospice workers. When my dad passed away, so my dad was actively dying, and family was in the room, and one of my uncles was telling funny stories and laughing.
Oh.
And I was so upset. And I thought, could he be more inappropriate? And I was like, this needs to be somber and serene, and we really need to be quiet. This is a spiritual space, And my uncle stepped out, and I took aside the nurse and I said, could you please talk to him and share with him the appropriate way to show up and blah, blah, blah. And the nurse had worked in hospice. My dad did not die in hospice, but this nurse thankfully had the experience. And he did exactly what I needed. And he said, you know what, Rachel, everyone has their own experience at end of life. And for your uncle, this might be what's supportive to him. And I'm willing to bet that your uncle and your dad's relationship was a lot of funny stories and a lot of laughing and joking. And I bet your dad would appreciate that. And it was like, snap out of it, Rachel. And I looked at him and I just said, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. He kind of, because I was so in my grief, I wasn't seeing. And so while I didn't lean on him for support, I went to him to fix what I thought was an issue. From the staff that had helped other families through it, I was able to have that support. So the tension went away, at least on my end, and a conflict didn't come out. And thankfully, something didn't come out of my mouth. in that moment.
Well, and now you have had that learning moment. So I'm sure when you're working with families or in those dynamics, you can say,
Oh,
hey,
100%. Yeah.
this is
And
processing. Yeah.
yeah, and in the legal field, when I talk to colleagues, divorce attorneys and probate attorneys, so divorce and then after someone dies, they're the attorneys who are pretty much the only lawyers I hear jokingly giving the sentiment of, "Oh my God, my clients are crazy. My clients are nuts. My clients are insane. You wouldn't believe this. They have the most dramatic stuff." Well, what are the two what's happening in a divorce and end of life?
Major life.
Processing loss.
Yeah.
It's grief.
Mhm.
And I mean, I've gone through it. My grandma died when I was in college. I had to call and make apologies after her funeral. And I remember being at her funeral and just being really on edge and irritable and saying just kind of snappy, rude things and wondering, why am I doing this? Grief.
Yeah.
I have to be real self-aware and really on top of it when I'm grieving because my best personality traits don't come out in those moments. And I think that's true for most of us if we're being honest with ourselves.
Right. And really, when we experience big loss like that, most of us, hopefully, have not gone through that before
Yeah.
or very rarely. And so we are not experts at how we process grief. We are doing this
Um,
for the first time. We're learning about ourselves, we're learning about people around us. There's just so much happening in those moments.
yeah, and even if it isn't the first time, grief's hard no matter what. For me, it's a full, and I think a lot of people that work in the grief field or have gone through it will attest to this. It's a physical experience. I couldn't believe how physical it was for me, not just emotional or mental. But I needed a lot of sleep and my body hurt. But it also can be very different. I mean, when my dad passed away, it was a complex grief. He was an abusive alcoholic for a lot of my life. We were estranged for years. There was reconciliation at the end of life after he had Alzheimer's. That was just a complex grief.
Yeah.
My loss with my mom, that relationship has its own dynamics. When someone loses a sibling, did a seminar, a continuing legal education talk, and it was about estate planning, brought in grief. And a gentleman came up and he said, I'm going to get a little emotional talking about this. He came up and he said, I lost my younger brother last year, and people don't realize that siblings are who are going to be in your life the longest. And I have not felt supported. I don't feel like people understand this. And I had never thought of it that way. And I kind of sat back and I thought, that's absolutely true. I mean, my younger brother's been in my life since I was 2, and most likely he will be in my life way past when my parents pass away. That's going to be its whole own other loss. And so, even if it's not the first time grief and processing loss, I don't know that it gets easier. We maybe just become more self-aware. And well, what I'm hopeful for, I have not lost, knock on wood, anyone super close to me since my dad passed. But what I hope to do in the future is take space,
Oh.
not throw myself into work, cry, do it a little differently, but I don't expect it to be lighter.
No, never gets easier.
Mm-mm.
We learn so much about ourselves in it. Yeah.
100%.
So you're an attorney and an end of life doula. You manage the interplay between these emotions
Mhm.
and the legal considerations in all of these conversations. How do you navigate that?
How I navigate it now is certainly more fluid than it was when I started practicing law this way. And the end of life doula work, where it shows up in my law practice, is really in the client counseling piece. When I initially started bringing in some more of those personal conversations or honoring emotions or not calling them out, but recognizing them in the room, I would say things like, okay, I'm taking my attorney hat off, and then make it very
We're
clear.
shifting gears, yeah.
Right, yeah, and now it happens a lot more organically, and that's all 100% just me getting comfortable with that. I was not trained as an attorney to lawyer that way. It was very law is black and white and emotions aren't in it, which in this area of practice does not honor the client or the experience. And I don't think it's good for the attorneys either to just be closed off to all that happens. in the rooms with people. The end of life doula piece definitely shows up in the client counseling and how I support them and how I provide additional resources and referrals. So I volunteer doing end of life doula work. I don't work doing it. We don't offer it through the law firm. My clients can't hire me to be an end of life doula. If I believe they would benefit from one, I know a ton of great end of life doulas I refer to. We have a grief coach that we collaborate with where if someone really, really needs grief support as they work through their documents, we'll pay for a coaching session with the grief coach. We have in my commercial building I own, I have the law firm on the first floor, and I very intentionally rented office space within the building to a grief therapist. We have grief nonprofits. We have people here that are their own business, but we can refer to and support. We do monthly seminars to create community and provide support around it. So it's a lot of staying in my lane because I am a lawyer first and foremost. I'm not a grief therapist. I'm not the appropriate person to help when things get to a certain point. But what I can say is I've had a few clients have panic attacks, and I can do a grounding exercise and create a safe space for them and get them back in their bodies. I've learned that intentionally. I've sought out the training and how to do that, but I'm not then giving them a therapy session.
Yeah. I love the holistic approach. I think first and foremost, our humanity comes through in these moments. And so having you be able to provide that is such a gift to people because they might not be receiving that from others in their world. So thank you for that.
Totally. And I'll share too, I mean, it's a gift for others and it's been a massive gift for me. I try to support people taking the time to practice law this way, to work professionally this way. It doesn't always, it's not about like some of these conversations and some of this effort isn't billable, lawyers all about the billable hour. But to just give you an example, we have a client who lost his wife. We did what we do and we really showed up and supported him. This last November, had a really intense dream about my dad. And my dad died in 2019. And I woke up from this dream, and it was the first time that my brain actually registered that I would not hug him again. Years later, that thought came into my head, it clicked, and it was very emotionally overwhelming. And I opened up my email that morning, and I had a message from this client we had supported sending me a note of gratitude. And he said, I know you've lost your dad, and he has daughters my age. He said, I know you've lost your dad. If you ever just want to feel like you're with a dad, we could get coffee. You're a daughter any dad would be proud to have.
Wow.
The timing of that was so incredibly divine. And I just was like, thank you, universe, and that's just one example. The way that I have built my business and create this support to clients, sometimes I feel like it comes back tenfold in the moments that I absolutely need it. And we all deserve that for ourselves. And it's not, it comes back.
Right. It does. It does. What a beautiful community that you're building. And I'm sure that they feel just the same way, right?
I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. So, in some of the more details about healthcare directives, what are you noticing or what do you see? Like, what are the misconceptions people have, or I would say hesitancy? So, how do we encourage people that this is important, which is why we're having this conversation?
Two of the big misconceptions. One is a client or a person saying, well, I really don't need one. The doctor will talk to my spouse. The doctor will talk to my kids. Have we seen that in the past? Yeah, not as much now. And it comes with lawsuits around HIPAA. I mean, doctors really shouldn't be sharing certain information, and they appropriately get nervous too. Another misconception is, oh, doctors don't really pay attention to that anyway. They're going to do what they're going to do. That's not going to hold any weight. Well, I watched my dad's healthcare directive hold a whole lot of weight when we were supporting him at end of life. 3 pages of paper allowed me to support my dad in a peaceful end of life transition. Those are the 2 biggest misconceptions that people have that are just inaccurate. Also thinking there'll be time to do it, or this is something I do once it's needed. Usually once it's needed, you can't sign a legal document. I've had people's children call me. It happens maybe once a quarter. Someone will call and they'll say, well, I guess it's time for my mom to do her estate planning. I go, okay, are you reaching out to schedule an appointment with her? Yep, but you'll have to come to her. She's been in a memory care unit for 8 years.
Oh,
Okay, let's talk about this. Depending how far that Alzheimer's dementia has advanced, pretty darn good chance it's not time, it's way past time. So better to just do it sooner rather than later.
do you find people are hesitant with the costs associated, or is it really not as overwhelming as we anticipate it to be? Or is it
Um,
vary probably based on circumstance and
it's relative. At our firm, we do flat fee planning. Healthcare directives right now are $300. There are absolutely law firms that charge more. There's attorneys that charge less. A lot of doctors' offices have internal forms, like within their hospital, that you can access. There's free clinics that go on. When I was in law school, we did a healthcare directive day where people could come in and do them at no cost. There's different organizations that do pro bono work. One organization our firm volunteers with is called Cancer Legal Care. It's in Minnesota. Free legal services across the board to individuals receiving cancer treatments and or with terminal cancer diagnoses. I've had clients call me that need basic documents, don't have a lot of assets, and I even tell them, hey, call Cancer Legal Care and request our firm. We'll take this as a pro bono. So there's my point being, relatively speaking, it's inexpensive. For some people, cost might be prohibitive, and there's other options. And those are things that, I mean, if we get those phone calls or we get those clients, we're going to connect them with those resources or point them in that direction. I would hope that most law firms do that.
I do too. Thank you. It's so helpful to know that we've got option, right? And
Yeah.
trust. If someone's listening and they're like, okay, I'm ready to do a healthcare directive, walk us through what that process looks like. What do we need to consider, an outline of steps, and yeah, all the essential elements included in that.
Generally speaking, with healthcare directives or estate planning documents, I will say more often than not, we're talking about healthcare directives, but we're also going to talk about power of attorney. We won't go into those documents on this, but healthcare directives is part of a bigger picture. Generally, that will start with a no-cost initial consultation. Most law firms offer free initial consultations. Some charge. Those are questions you can get up, ask, and receive that information up front. But we schedule a free initial consultation with one of our attorneys. We send out an intake packet, which will ask the questions so people know what they should be thinking about. We just ask that they fill it out as fully as they're able. And sometimes that means we get their name, their address, their date of birth, and their phone number. And then when we ask, who do you want as a healthcare agent? The response is, well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I don't know. That's what we'll go over in the first meeting. And so we sit with our clients, we talk about each of the documents, we learn their goals, concerns, questions, to determine the most efficient and cost-effective approach to getting the documents in place. So we do a pretty thorough initial consultation. We give legal advice. We help to identify the best route forward. And then once we're hired, we continue to support and go into more detail as is requested or necessary.
So when we complete that form, how often do we review or update it? Is it like one and done? Do we look at it regularly? What's your advice on that?
I do recommend reviewing it regularly. That can vary for a lot of people. I look at mine every year, specifically the extra wishes for my healthcare directive, but I change my mind a lot. And I see and hear a lot of things in the work I do that, I'll have a client come in and say, you won't believe what happened. Well, great. Now I have a new anxiety that I need to put in.
Yeah.
I also, being in my mid 30s, I went through a divorce. Like I'm going through a lot of change. My career's changing. I have life changes. My younger brother just moved into this state. I haven't lived in the same town as him since I was 18. So I review regularly because I have a lot of changes and my mind changes a lot. For some other clients, they have the same medical wishes that they've had for the last 30 years, and they're going to name their spouse and their 3 kids, and they know that's not going to change. They may not need to update that much. I will note at our firm, we do the additional wishes as an attachment to the healthcare directive. So clients don't have to have us update the wishes. They can do that. We empower them to be able to do that on their own. So it's not cost prohibitive, because what tends to change most frequently are those wishes. And I don't want my clients to have to get out a checkbook every time they want to change their end of life wishes, that's incorporated into a healthcare directive.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
And it is those life events too. So, moves, divorce, when we have those major
Yep.
things happen, it's reevaluating, looking at that. Yeah.
Yeah. If someone that you named in the document passes away, if you get a new diagnosis, those are times that I see people really getting them out and reanalyzing what's in the documents.
You had mentioned the 5 wishes, but also the Cancer Center here in the Twin Cities. What other resources and guidance and support services do you love to also recommend to people as well that they're thinking about all these different things?
Well, there's a organization called the Minnesota Death Collaborative. It's a collaborative of a number of professionals and businesses that work in this area. I'm the only attorney in it. So it is a lot of that grief support, end of life direct support, funeral planning. They have a lot of resources, they have speakers, and it's a great place to go to find professionals in communities. Lakewood Cemetery is a local cemetery that does a ton of free community programming or very low cost community programming. I'm going to a sound meditation around end of life. It's an end of life sound meditation there in a couple weeks. That's another great resource. Your doctor can be a great resource. Like I said, they tend to have internal forms that might be a good place to start. I have a lot of clients that work from those and then bring them in as guidance or to kind of inform what they're hiring us to draft. If your parent is in a senior living community or a long-term care facility, the social workers on staff there or staff there can be a real wealth of knowledge. Hospice providers are incredible. Our Lady of Peace Hospice. There's a lot. There's a lot in the Twin Cities, and it's growing because there's a demand for it. I've seen death cafes popping up. Those are kind of cool, funky events that go on. It's literally, let's all get together and talk about death.
Okay.
Death cafe. It is people gather. The topic is death. It's kind of open forum to talk. And a traditional death cafe usually has cake. There's 1 or 2, I think, starting to gain traction in the Twin Cities.
Hey, good to know. I did not know. I'm sure it helps break down some of that stigma too, as we just can talk about things with people. Yeah.
Yeah. And on our website, the Schromen Law website, we have an events page. It has our monthly events, but the professionals that we bring in also have their own seminars and build their own communities. We had a end of life doula come in named Cami Thilander, and she's started a whole grief community, and she's building this really, really robust community that has a ton of resources. And if you can't, I've been really diving into the resource piece in just the last year and a half. And once you start going, there's a lot available. It's just kind of knowing where to start looking. And our office is always happy to make those connections. I say that there's work I do day to day as an attorney. And there's probably a better way to state this, but I say some of the work feeds my bank account and some of it feeds my soul.
Totally. Yeah.
A lot of it does both, which is super amazing. And I'm very, very lucky. But we're never upset if someone just reaches out asking if we know of a support group, because we are so passionate about that work. I really feel that this type of support and work I do is my life's purpose. So I share that because we're happy to help get people connected.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. It is so needed. I feel like when we are going through life's changes and what all is thrown at us, to have the support system and have the guidance is invaluable. So it's so appreciated. So, from all of us to you, thank you for that. And you've curated all these really great resources and are such a support system for people. So it is very appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Well, this has been, I learned so much, and I feel
Good.
like it is helpful when we're talking about the unknown, and to put some more insight into it gives us the courage to put things in place and have action. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing with us. And we'll have to have you come back. I think there's a lot more we could talk about.
I would love that. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed our episode, please subscribe and give us 5 stars. In all honesty, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening to our episode.